My only question is about funding, which was an issue addressed in the second session this morning. Here is the court, our judicial branch, committed to transparency, going throughout the state, being active, interacting with the people. One would think that there would be an appreciation, confidence in the judiciary, a sense of need for it that would lead to better funding, or at least for an absence of the kinds of funding problems that the court has experienced. Are you surprised by that? Given the outreach that you've all engaged in, why isn't there more support that manifests itself in the form of a better budgeting for the court?
I wish I had the answer to that question. I would like to suggest that after our lunch today, if you would agree to testify for us across the street about judicial branch funding, that'd be great. I don't have an answer for that. Unfortunately, I've speculated about it with my colleagues on occasion, and about the only thing we can do, I think, is to continue to try to be transparent and go out and show people in Kansas who we are and what we do and how we do it. But that doesn't necessarily translate into the legislature, for example, saying, we see a need for you, you have an important function in society, and we're going to fully fund you. They have competing interests, and we would hope that they would recognize that as a branch of government, we should be fully funded, and that for those of you who are constitutional law scholars, you can go to the Kansas Constitution and say, we're Article 3. The court system has been in Kansas since before 1861. We had territorial courts. So somebody back in those days thought that we were kind of important, and we've not been eliminated for over 150 years. And there are other worthy projects, or there are worthy agencies, or other items in the state, don't get me wrong, but they are not mentioned in the Constitution. And I like to think that we are one of the pillars of Kansas, and we deserve that recognition, but more importantly, that funding. But if anybody here has any ideas how we can make our case for better funding from the legislature, I'm happy to hear it.
Well, do you think the media has done a very good job showing the importance of the judicial branch? I mean, and should we somehow work harder for you, not for you, but for us? I kind of think maybe we as a business have I don't know, maybe slipped a little bit in our responsibility in fighting the good fight for what our Constitution does stand for. I think things like this today help us realize things like that, and how we need to make it more of a priority.
Let me say, I've been pleased over the last year with the coverage provided to the courts. When we had to close the courts in the spring of 2010, I thought we got excellent coverage around the state. When we had to close the courts again last spring, I thought we got excellent coverage. And it went so far as to appearing on the editorial pages of a number of newspapers. I thought we got favorable coverage through the radio and other media. So I don't have any complaint about what I've seen so far. I'm reluctant to get out front on that because I'm a judge and we have certain restrictions on what we can do and say. But I couldn't tell you what more the media might do to get our word out, if you will. As I said, I was very pleased with it. I just would hope that people in Kansas don't just fall asleep on this issue, and that they know what's at stake and what might be lost if certain actions are taken. And I know that all my colleagues feel the same way. The judges on the Court of Appeals feel the same way, particularly on our judicial selection of appellate jurists. And I'm confident that many, many of our district judges out in the communities feel the same way, as do our employees, that we're not in the judicial branch of government for the money. We're doing this because we feel a commitment to something larger than ourselves, which is serving the people of Kansas. And an example that I witnessed yet again just last Friday, and our friend from Kingman can attest, Judge Solomon, who's the chief judge of that district, was there with his staff, and they were there when I got there at 9:30. Everything was completely set up. All I had to do, as I like to tell my colleagues, is pretend like I was Eric Clapton. I just show up, they hand me a guitar, the microphone for singing is ready to go, the guitar's tuned. All I got to do is perform, and then I get to leave, and they got to sweep up. But I left, I think, about 5:30, and Judge Solomon was still there. His staff was still there. And this was on a Friday afternoon. And I know there are a lot of people in the judicial branch who take their jobs that seriously. They're professionals. And I just wish that more people in Kansas could see the kind of people that we have. And there are many more examples that I could give you, but that's the freshest in my mind. And we've got people who, when we closed the courts for 4 days in 2010, they wanted to sneak in the courthouse when it was closed to do their work. And they wanted to come in on weekends to get caught up on their work. And we had to tell them, no, you can't do that. But we just have an awful lot of dedicated people who, as I said, are not in it for the money, but they want to serve people in Kansas. But maybe with this recording, it gets posted on YouTube or something, and when people are really bored on their beach in Jamaica, they can call this up, hey, it's Nuss speaking, and see what's said. Any other questions? Yes?
When the courts close, do they end up hearing fewer cases, or are those cases just delayed?
They're just stacked up. I read something in this is a plug for the Salina Journal, my hometown newspaper. When I was visiting my mother a few weeks ago, they were interviewing a med student in Salina, and that student was saying, in our training, you've got to eat the pancakes given to you every day. Because if you don't finish them, the next day you're going to get a fresh plate of more pancakes. And that's the way it is in the judicial branch. If you don't get the work done that day, it's going to be waiting for you the next day, along with brand new cases that have been filed. And they just pile up and pile up and pile up. Yeah. Yes?
Chief Justice, we've heard a lot today about how open the court is on the state level and some of the things that have been implemented to really put Kansas towards the forefront of the nation when it comes to access and openness. What is your opinion on how well counties are doing, right, as far as, do you feel as though that they're following the lead of the state in regards to openness when it comes to accessibility? And if they're not, what do you think can be done on the state level to bring them in line?
Well, what we've done with our recently modified rule is to give discretion to our local judges on how they're going to handle things. And I think a lot of what those judges wind up doing, frankly, depends upon the resources that are available to the county through the county commission, because they're the ones who are funding the courthouse itself. They're paying the utilities, they're paying for, I started to say typewriters, that's not good anymore, the iPads and all that sort of thing. And there are just some different attitudes around different places in the state on just how much access is enough. And I'm not going to point out any examples for you, but if we find that a district judge is just being recalcitrant about doing anything and refuses to exercise his or her discretion that we've given in that order, then we'll probably talk with that judge and say, we think you're being a little too strict here, how about opening things up? But I think one of the helpful things that we do on the cases where that warrant it, we ask Ron Kiefover to go out, and he can advise the judge on matters such as that. He knows very well what the discretion calls for, and he can get the judge aside and say, you might want to reconsider your decision on this, or before the judge makes a decision, Ron could advise and say, it seems to me these are your options, and I would recommend, you know, number 1, number 2 out of these 10 options. Thank you.
We're about out of time. Is there one more or any, are we through with questions?
Yes.
I'm just curious, you referenced the fact that obviously you're restricted in what you can do in advocating your particular funding position. Who does represent you? I mean, how does that work?
You mean besides relying upon the logic of our elected officials?
Yes.
Okay. I would hope that we have enough citizens in Kansas who would speak up. And I saw some of that last spring, for example, on the day that we closed the courts. I think it was the Wichita Eagle interviewed a man and a woman who came to the courthouse to buy a marriage license, and they found out the doors were locked and they couldn't get in. And I can't quote for you today what they said as was quoted in the paper, but they were not real happy about that fact. And there were some other stories I saw in some other media that were talking to people when they found out that the courts were closed. I think the Topeka Capital Journal had a picture of Judge Frank Yeoman, who was doing his paperwork in the clerk's office, and the paper was saying, you know, he had a little peace and quiet because there was nobody there to interrupt him or to bother him. It was just the judges, because the clerks and all the staff had been sent home, and the public, which usually would be pouring through the doors, were locked out. So I'm hoping that there are enough people last year who were inconvenienced or really inconvenienced by that who would speak up and would remember it as we seek funding this year. And they might be talking with their friends and say, gee, that was kind of ridiculous last year. We don't want to have that again.